because there are several reports out there today that the Astros have engaged the Mets about Pete Alonso. Astros trying to make a run of it after a terrible start to their season, but they played much better of late. But the Seattle Mariners are still holding on, but within striking distance for Houston. And Houston's not going to go anywhere. They're not going to, just roll over and say, oh, this is not our year. That's not the way that organization works. And they need a first baseman. Remember, they ate $35 million remaining on the contract of Jose Abreu because he couldn't play anymore. So they reportedly have contacted the Mets. So the knee-jerk reaction right away would be, well, the Mets are in it. Why would they deal Pete Alonso? Well, I've thought this over a lot. I think the Mets have to have a meeting amongst themselves, and they have to say, are we going to sign Pete Alonso? And if the answer is no, well, because they're so far over the cap or the tax, they're not going to get much for him when he leaves as a free agent. They're just not. Because you don't get a sandwich pick because your pick is just eliminated because you're so far over the tax.
Right.
Do you believe that the Mets could still contend by moving Vientos over to first if they traded Pete Alonso? Now, if the Mets have no intention of keeping Pete Alonso, and they could even talk to Boris about it, well, what exactly do you think you'll be looking for? And if they don't think that they're going to sign him, doesn't matter what the fan base thinks. You have to calculate, Don, whether or not you can continue to win by moving Vientos over to first base. And if you think that you can, and you're not going to sign Pete Alonso, why not engage with the Astros and other teams that would have interest?
See, because there's two sides to it. Would I like Pete Alonso to stay? This goes back to my Ed Kranepool rant of there being a lack of forever Mets, and this could be a guy with all of his flaws that can go out there and be a career Met and hit 500 home runs, have his number retired. And unlike Saquon Barkley, when you're in a cap sport and you've got to make the right decisions, and you just can't give gold watches out. Baseball, especially with Steve Cohen as your owner, sometimes you can think that way. But if David Stearns is hell-bent on building a team without Pete Alonso on it and has no intention of offering him a contract that Scott Boras is going to say yes to, well, then you got to live in the reality and say that you've got to think of a way to get something for him. Now, you ask, can they contend without Pete Alonso? I mean, he's having an okay year, Michael. He picked up an RBI today. He's got 18 home runs, 49 RBIs, 241 batting average. You project that out, he's a guy that's probably going to hit, between 35 and 40 home runs and drive in like mid-90 RBIs. It's not nothing. But over the last 30 games, when the Mets have turned things around here, he's got 4 home runs and 18 RBIs. So you can make the case that they have been a contender and have turned it around really without Pete Alonso doing very much. It's really been about Lindor. It's been about Vientos. It's been about Nimmo. It's been about other players and the starting pitching coming together. So is that 30 games enough for you to say, I believe that in the final 60-plus games, whatever it is, if you made a decision to trade him, can we see something similar and the team continue to carry itself without Pete Alonso? And based on that 30-game sample, I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, I don't believe that what they are, and I like Pete Alonso, and I think that he's a pretty good player, but I don't think he's David Stearns type of player. That's why I have said for the last month or so, I don't think the Mets are going to resign him. I also don't think he's going to get the $40 million a year he thinks he's going to get on the open market, because that's not the ongoing rate for first baseman. But, Scott Boras is going to try. Would he be more of David Stearns' player if David Stearns could sign him for $30 million a year? Maybe, but is he a reason why they're doing what they're doing? And my answer is no. As you said, Nimmo is having an all-star type year. Lindor is having an all-star type year. Iglesias has been an unbelievable addition for this team. Very quietly, Harrison Bader is having an excellent year for the Mets. And they're doing this without Starling Marte either. So the bottom line is, if you shift Vientos, who is having a good year, over to first, because Pete Alonso is not winning you that many games defensively, and we know that Vientos is not a great third baseman, what would you do at third? Would you have Iglesias there? Would you call Beatty back up? Not quite certain, but you have to calculate within the organization, can we continue to contend without him? Because if you don't think you can, then I don't trade him. Because I don't think you're going to get all that much for him if you don't think you can. Because I think it's important, Don, to get into the playoffs and change the culture of the organization.
Yeah, you've nailed it. Can this team survive without Pete Alonso? Now, listen, you could also make the case that, if Pete can catch fire and all of a sudden really solidify this team as in the postseason and really move up the standings and not have to settle for the third wild card. So there's that, too. I mean, you can look and say, well, he's been pedestrian over the last 30. The Mets have played well. But you could also fantasize, what if this guy gets really hot and then can carry us, maybe not to, obviously not a division title, that ship sailed, but now not only a wild card team, but maybe a team that can be competitive in the postseason. So you do run the risk of that, too. But I think you've got to think about the long-term health of this team. I mentioned it yesterday, Michael. They are a 500 team. They are a playoff team because the National League stinks. But do you believe that if they made the playoffs, could they make a run? And with this bullpen, I don't think they can. But that doesn't mean they can't make deals. Maybe Maton solidifies this bullpen. He's pitching right now. Maybe they get somebody else at the trade deadline that can make the bullpen work. It's a very difficult decision. But at the end of the day, you don't want to sit there, miss the playoffs, Pete Alonso leaves as a free agent, and you did not help your organization moving forward. And if the Astros offer you something that blows you away, you have to consider it. You have to sit down and consider it, Michael, because ultimately the long-term health of this franchise has to be paramount to what's happening this season.
All right,
is that fair to say?
It is fair to say, but let me ask you this. As a Met fan, Met fans really do like Pete Alonso.
I do, too.
Does that come into play at all?
I think, listen, should it? I don't think so. We had this conversation yesterday about Saquon Barkley. You got to do what's best for your organization. But for me, as a fan of the team, and I brought this up yesterday, that baseball's different than football. You need to entertain me during the course of 162. Pete Alonso's been a really good soldier here. He's a really good player, and he's done a lot for this franchise. And I thought Steve Cohen was supposed to be a guy that can keep players, that maybe overpay players that maybe you don't need to pay that much to, because you're not worried about the luxury tax. You're not worried about spending money.
But I don't think that's the issue here. I just don't think he's David Stern's type of player.
Understood.
Because I think, obviously, Steve Cohen could afford whatever he wants, and he could top anybody's offer. But if you really have handed the keys to the kingdom to David Stearns, and David Stearns does not like what Pete Alonso brings to the party analytically, then you're not going to sign him anyway. And then if you do sign him against his wishes,
right, exactly.
That's really bad, too, because, you've said, okay, you're running baseball.
Right. So now it just comes down to, with what you know about this organization, you got to do. You're going to have to move them. I'm just saying, from a fan standpoint, you really hate to see somebody like that go. Now let's see what it looks like after he leaves. If they replace him with the David Stearns type of guy, and they start winning championships, nobody's going to care. But it is going to hurt to give him up. Especially since this franchise hasn't been known for having a forever player.
But therein lies the rub, though. If you know you're not signing him,
right,
then the only calculus is can we continue to contend without him?
Yes, and I think that's really what it comes down to.
And do you think they can?
Based on the last 30 games, the answer is yes. Based on the last 30 games, he has 4 home runs, 18 RBIs. He's batting .246.
Right.
Slugging percentage of .404. On-base percentage of .331. Again, it's not god-awful, but that's not what got this team back into it, Michael. When this team was floundering 11 games under 500, and now today, if they hold on to this 5-0 lead, will be above 500. It hasn't been about Pete Alonso. You gave the list of people that it's been about. It's been about Lindor. It's been about Alvarez. It's been about Nimmo. It's been about so many other pieces, Vientos. So it hasn't been about Alonso. But that doesn't mean the next 30, Pete can't turn around and hit 10, 12 home runs and, drive in a bunch of RBIs and become that type of player. But based over the sample size we've seen in this turnaround, it's not been about Pete. So I guess the answer would be yes.
All those are Diamond Notes, brought to you by London Jewelers. Visit London Jewelers today at any of their 7 locations, including the Americana Mall and the mall at Short Hills, and driven by Nissan. You deserve a car that thrills you. And Nissan's got an exciting full line that'll put goosebumps on you with Goosebumps. Experience the thrill for yourself. Shop your local Nissan store at nissanusa.com today.
So I think we need to accentuate that to any future callers is it's not about us and what we feel. It's that if he is gone at the end of the season, then what is best for the long-term health of this team, even if it does, Michael, potentially injure a chance for this team to make the playoffs.
See, that's where we disagree. You're not going to get anything life-changing for Pete Alonso. So if you removing him from the equation hurts to make the playoffs, then I would make the move, even if you're not going to sign him.
Well, then, but you just said if you're not going to get anything life-changing. Well, if you're not going to get anything life-changing, then what's the conversation? I mean, I'm not going to just trade him for a bag of balls just for the sake of saying I got something for Pete Alonso instead of him walking away for nothing.
Right.
But if Houston's serious and is give up some kind of crown jewel in their prospects, you probably know better than me how deep their prospect pool is there in Houston. That if you're going to get something that does move the needle, then by all means, I think you have to do it. But please, Peter, right, it's got to be about what the package is. If the package is just something that doesn't do anything for you just for the sake of saying I have something of value instead of nothing, that is obviously going to affect my decision on whether to trade him or not.
I think there's 2 questions. Yeah, number one, what can you get, and does it make it worthwhile to let go of him now, even if you think you're not going to re-sign him? And number 2, Michael, I think the interesting piece is how do Met fans actually feel about the idea of letting go? Like, this is something we talked about yesterday with regard to the Giants and Saquon. And, I mean, I would certainly argue the Mets have much more, maybe not like, all-time Met guys, but they have other players fans can hang their hat on a bit besides Pete Alonso. But he has been the guy now for a while. I just wonder if they're going to care or not. Like, will there be an actual sadness? I can't quite tell.
Honestly, it's really just about how the team ends up looking at the end of the day. I mean, listen,
I know what Peter's saying, though. Do the Met fans love him that much?
Like, will they be like Don? There's a world in which you could tell. Okay, great example. You could tell me the Commanders are going to make a move for Terry McLaurin, and it's a really smart move, and they will be improved as a football team. I would be sad about that, in spite of improving because of the fact that he's been like our guy for a few years. Do people feel that way about Alonso, or will it simply be we knew we were parting with him, we can get a good piece, peace out?
But again, I think that's a conversation for the end of the season. If he's definitely gone, I think fans already have to begin to let go, right? So you're probably watching the last 70 games of Pete Alonso's career as a Met anyway. And as far as like all time, and then this is coming from the Met fan perspective. Why do we love Keith? Why do we love Ron? Why do we love Gary Carter and Darryl Strawberry? They were great players and they were fun to watch, but we loved them because of '86. Right? I mean, listen, I grew up loving John Milner, but he never won me anything. I mean, at the end of the day, as a fan, don't you want your organization to be in a position to win? Now, ultimately, if Alonso goes someplace like to Houston and wins a championship and wins an MVP, and the Mets next year are a 90-loss team, that's not going to age well. But if you believe in David Stearns and you believe in the direction the franchise is going, which I do, I kind of have to think more about the team than the individual player. Players come and go, Peter, even great ones. But championships, there's only been 2 in my lifetime and only one that I remember with this franchise. I want to try to get back to where we're competing for championships, not collecting great players that aren't going to the postseason.
And the bottom line, the history of the franchise, they have continually let go of homegrown players, including maybe the greatest pitcher of all time. Tom Seaver was traded. Darryl Strawberry left. Dwight Gooden left. I mean, it just happens. That's the way this organization has been. So it's hard to get attached to somebody. But I think they should be more worried about competing. And if they're not going to get, and they could get somebody of import for them, then probably, I don't think you're going to get a star prospect, but maybe you could get a bullpen piece. Who knows?
Hey, listen, it's apples and oranges, Michael. But, There was a time where Hubie Brooks was like the biggest prospect here. You didn't bat an eye when you brought Gary Carter in, right? Like, you do things, and we didn't know Gary Carter was going to win a World Series for the Mets. We didn't know that Keith Hernandez was going to win for the Mets when they got him in 1983. And you take a look at some of the players that they dealt away to get those players. There were some pretty good players. But they were able to win a championship, and nobody cared. You moved on. I mean, Hubie Brooks went to Montreal. Mets won a championship in '86, and Hubie, nice player. You didn't regret it for a second. So it really all depends on what happens at the end of the day when you make that deal. But ultimately, the prize has to be the ring, right? I like watching these players, but I fall in love with these players, Peter, because they help my team win. Yes, they entertain me. Yes, I like them. Yes, they're good in the community and all that. But at the end of the day, I want to see my team win.
Well, it's game time, brought to you by Tullamore Dew Irish Whiskey. We're talking about the Mets. They had an early start at 110, and they're live now as they look to sweep the Nationals. Boy, the Nationals have really been good for the Mets. The Nationals just can't beat the Mets. And the Yankees look to win the rubber match against the Rays at 6:50 p.m.